Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Turner. I direct the China Environment Forum at the Wilson Center, and lovely that you dropped in for tea today with me. A lot of you who tune into our webinars know that for the past 2 years, we've been doing a project called Turning the Tide on Plastic Waste in Asia. So we've been investigating the trends, kind of the solutions in terms of partnerships and innovations. We're focused on Asia because the narrative around plastics for a long time has been that, Asia, China in particular, some countries in Southeast Asia, that they are leading ocean plastic leakage. Well, just to kind of mix up the conversation a little bit, there's a new report that came out from the National Academies of Sciences called Reckoning with the U.S. Role in Global Ocean Plastic Waste. And one of the, I shall we say, splashy results was that the U.S. is #1 in plastic generation, that we produce the most plastic. And I'm not going to tell you anymore because we're actually today going to have a conversation with Margaret Spring, who's the Chief Conservation and Science Officer at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. She was actually I don't know if you were chosen, you were chosen to be the head of the committee that produced the report. And I think I know why, in looking at your bio, Margaret, why you were chosen. You're a perfect blend of science and policy. Like you were in the leadership at NOAA, you were up on the Hill as a general counsel at a Senate committee. I have to look at the committee name because I always forget it, the Commerce, Science, and Transport Committee. And now you're at the Monterey Bay, and we're all going to sigh at your backdrop there. And it's like, you're in one of the most beautiful places in the world. I lived there for 1 year, many moons ago. And so I want to brought Margaret here today to talk about the report, and want to point out that underneath the stream that there's a widget for you to submit your question. Lovely. Make sure you'll put your name, and if you could tell us where you're coming from, that's also awesome. Also very helpful. But we're going to dive right in. So maybe to get us started, Margaret, can you give a quick introduction to where did this report come from, and then you could start going into some of the big takeaways.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. And I'm really pleased to be here on this in the China Environment Forum tea chat. I think it's the first time I've had a tea chat or a green tea chat, so this is fun. Yes, I'd love to talk about this report. Yes, you're right. My normal day job is being at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and I previously served on the Ocean Studies Board of the National Academies. And when the National Academies was asked by NOAA to conduct this report, then the National Academy selected 10 experts to talk about it and asked me if I'd be willing to chair, which I said, of course. Now, the genesis of this report actually was with Congress. It's a bipartisan request from the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act. Congress asked that the National Academies conduct a study to better understand the U.S. role in global ocean plastic waste. And so a committee was formed, and that's how we started almost a year and a half ago now. And so that pattern has followed what other countries have done. You've seen Canada, EU, UK, other countries try to assess what their own role is. And so I regard this as sort of a foundational document, because while there's been a lot of information flowing at the global level about the problem of plastic waste from UNEP and other organizations, we as a country didn't have a really good handle on the numbers. What's our role? What do we contribute, and how do we contribute to global ocean plastic waste? And so the bipartisan authors of the Save Our Seas Act asked us to look at it, and NOAA was the sponsor, and we appreciate that because that's how many reports get done. The agencies have to come in and ask us to do it. And so we were given a very clear 6-part statement of task, and the task was really associated with trying to gather up all the existing data that we could find on a series of questions, from production all the way and export all the way to disposal in the ocean, and some options that could be considered. And I'm pleased to say that the bipartisan sponsors who asked for the report were welcomed the report in a bipartisan statement. And so I feel like we did a good job. There's more to be done. There's over 10 more reports to be conducted under the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act. So more information is coming out on the U.S. role in all sorts of aspects. But I was really pleased to be part of this amazing 10-member committee that met over Zoom for a year. Normally, National Academies reports are done in person. You get to know people, and it was an amazing group. And I know you've had at least one of them on your chat in your webinars, Jenna Jambeck from the University of Georgia. But we have an amazing lineup. So that's how it came to be. And we issued the report and are still briefing the government on its findings. It came out at the end of, right before the holidays in December. So that's where we are today.
I saw it as, personally, I saw it as a Christmas present. I'm like, yeah, this is good. Because there's, and I want to point out to people that we have a link to the report on our website, and you should really check out the interactive component to it, which kind of lays out a lot of, the recommendations, the interventions. But maybe just briefly, because I know we want them to go read the report, but what were some the biggest, some of the trends or things that maybe as you were doing this, I mean, you were immersed in water and ocean stuff all the time, but were you surprised by anything? Or what do you think you want to tell people that they make sure they know about this report in terms of the content?
Yeah. Well, sure. I mean, I think, we all know the plastic problem from different perspectives. And in fact, when I was on Capitol Hill, we helped create the first US report on the state of the ocean. And in that report, they had a whole chapter on marine debris. And many of us were thinking about what was happening in the ocean. And so what was really helpful was beginning in a very systematic way to go through what we know about what we're producing and how it's being treated. And what surprised me, as it does many people, is that the US is the largest generator of plastic solid waste.
Okay.
These are very tricky statistics, but and so every country has a different story of how they interact with this problem. No country is like any other. And so for our country, we have a very developed, as compared with other countries, waste management system. And so while we're the largest generator of plastic waste and the largest generator of solid waste, we basically we have a management system that is probably better, a solid waste management system that's better than most countries. And so the way we contribute to U.S. global ocean plastic waste is through leakage from our management system, which happens a lot, unfortunately. And so there was a study in 2020 that we cite that indicates that based on estimates, that these are mostly estimates, of course, based on how much leaks physically from our solid waste management system, how much is exported to countries that have poor waste management systems, and some other data, we are estimated to be the 3rd to 12th largest contributor of plastic waste to the coastal environment. And that was a study in Science Advances. Now, this report was a synthesis, the first synthesis of the information that's around. We didn't undertake our own independent studies. Of course, you don't have the time for that. So I think just understanding the scope of how much we as a country produce in waste was, I think, shocking to many of us, although these are all data that have been available for a while. The other thing was that there really is no safety net for plastic waste. The one safety net we have is the way we manage solid plastic waste, but the plastic waste is not, or plastic pollution is not treated as a contaminant, a classic contaminant under environmental law, which we're used to. And as a former environmental lawyer, that was something that surprised me, that we don't know how much is coming out of industrial sources. We don't know, we're not monitoring what's coming out of the non-point sources. So all of the estimates we have, we were able to put together in the report are really a conservative estimate. Mm-hmm. So while we don't know exactly how much plastic waste we're contributing to the ocean, the scale is quite concerning. And so the other thing that I think that we identified was that the coordination was not as good as we thought it was at the federal level. And in fact, surprisingly, the states and the local governments in the United States are ahead of the federal government in devising solutions in the early stages of plastic pollution. You know, the US plastic pollution policy is to focus on source reduction, then reuse, then recycling, and then, you know, disposal. And so that's the hierarchy that we have used and that you learn as an environmental lawyer. So to see that we really focused on one end but not the other was really, I think, what came through in the data. We're really focused on cleanup, not so much on dealing with where it's coming from. And there was a huge mismatch between how we're producing and using plastic and how its end of life. So that's the seminal disconnect that I think our report tries to elevate into people's.
Yeah, no, good. Yeah, and actually, just there was like a 2-finger on the widget down below. Sumner Gerald Sandler said, "What is non-solid plastic waste, and what are the adverse consequences of its disposal?" I think about, so what do you mean by non-solid plastic waste? Is it microplastics?
Well, so under our current laws, there are plastic is regulated as part of municipal solid waste. Okay, so that's a good question, because municipal solid waste is what you throw in your garbage every day, right? There are lots of other solid waste that exist that are managed in different ways, but usually they're managed in a very prescriptive way if it's hazardous. And so we do not manage plastic waste that comes out of industrial sources. For example, if you've heard of nurdles, you've heard of pellets, those are not really part of municipal solid waste, but we know that they can be released accidentally or perhaps intentionally, we don't know. So you'll see that there are some ways of tracking that, but a lot of the evidence of that comes from the community science, as well as researchers who find them in the water and try to find the source. So it's a very interesting definitional challenge.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, you mentioned that we're actually having a water keeper down in Houston who's going to write a blog for us about the war, kind of a war against the nurdles that are flowing into the waterways there. And you know, so I've had a lot of conversations with the grassroots folks and the researchers, but what's, you know, striking, like in China, it's all very top down, right? You know, the government's going to fix this, and then, you know, so they're taking that approach. And, you know, but also notably in China and other Asian countries, there's this kind of national plan for plastics, national EPR plan, so that they are already, well, maybe the boots aren't on the ground implementing, but they're thinking this way. So I think, you know, what, and you already said, like the subnational government's doing a lot. What do you see as kind of like, we don't have to get in every single policy. What do you think is going to be the role that, you know, kind of an important next step, you know, for the federal government to take action?
Yeah, I think so. Our number one recommendation is that the United States develop a coordinated and comprehensive national systemic strategy for plastic waste from production to disposal. And you see a number of other countries doing that. And it's just taking a different approach to it, not dealing with it in a segmented way, but thinking about the whole life cycle of plastic. And you'll see that in circular economy plans developed by the EU, or the UK, or Canada, starting in that direction too, as part of even their climate change efforts. So it's all about not wasting valuable natural resources and also protecting the environment and being more efficient.
Yeah, well, you mentioned climate change. We had a meeting back in December where we had some speakers, like from the Center for International Environmental Law, and they were, you know, there's this kind of new area in plastics that I've seen about looking at the climate footprint of plastics. Was that, and someone even asked a question about Pierre LeBlanc from the Arctic Security Consultants, Ottawa, Canada, said, are microplastics not a threat equal to global warming? I think but so, you know, kind of raising the question about, well, that's severity, but was that something you guys dealt with in your report? The climate?
It wasn't part of our statement of task. Although when you look at production, what comes through very clearly is that 99% of plastics, as far as we can tell, are produced from fossil sources. And so the issues associated with plastic waste are very much entwined with the issues associated with climate change. Now, we did cite a number of other studies that looked at those questions, and there are a number of places where the impact of microplastics, for example, in the ecosystems might interfere with the uptake of blue carbon, which could be a solution area in climate change.
Mhm.
I think the health effects and the other effects of microplastics are generally still being studied aggressively, and certainly ecosystem impacts have been observed. But in terms of, I don't think we were asked to compare the risks. However, it's very clear that if you do address the problem of plastic pollution, you will have co-benefits associated with that, including addressing climate change, the growth of more production associated with plastic chemical production.
Well, so you're thinking, talking about plastic and climate, when I think a lot about how, like, the science, like this question of science, because this is a science report and I loved it. You interwove a lot of science in educating people about what's going on there. But when we look at like with plastic, like the science of, how it's made, how it pollutes. I mean, it's all very complicated, like how it leaks, the problems it causes, how to solve it. And it's very similar to climate change. And we know that for the past number of years that there's been, the science has been solid, but the understanding of it has been not always clearly communicated or understood. What do you think it's going to look like with the issue? Because next week there's a global plastic treaty being started. Do you think that the science around plastics is this going to be, are we going to get it easier as general public?
Well, what I've observed is that it is very understandable as an issue. And in fact, in every meeting we had and briefing from groups, that the problems associated with plastic waste in the environment are widely agreed to. Now, the severity, we're still learning a lot about it. So I'm not, the tangible and visible problems associated with plastic waste are so strong and so understandable that I do think that it's different dynamics that I'm seeing. But where it's like climate change, it's global, it's transboundary, a lot of those issues. And so it does lend itself to national and global solutions simultaneously. But I think that, I see this more as the science questions would be more like those associated with a pollutant that's regulated ultimately. What are the thresholds and what's the efficacy of a solution? Where are the benefits? Where's your cost benefit issue? All those questions are things that come up in that context. And I do see that there's a lot of interest in that, because when people have to make choices or governments have to decide which direction to go, they really want to understand the full impact. And so there'll be a lot of work to be done around those issues. There's plenty of work to be done on science within the federal system as well as independent. And I do think that this is an issue because it's bipartisan and because it is a really great partnership opportunity. I do have a lot of hope that there'll be great partnerships developed, not only within the United States, but also, and you're seeing that in some of the, the innovation challenges that are happening globally, as well as fostered by the federal government, as well as globally. And I know you had the countermeasures group on before. Certainly there are some important definitional issues we've got to get right, some standards that have to be clear, so that we're really talking about the same thing. You can see even in the report, when I'm communicating about the report, some data can be misconstrued because it's hard to, once you get into it, the difference. But I think where it's hard is figuring out, people always want to know who's the biggest, what's the worst. And so our message is, this is a very big problem. It's systemic. We've spent many, many decades creating it. And so we have to take a systemic approach to push back out of it. And there's a role for everybody. And I do look forward to more partnerships.
Yeah, and well, noting on partnership, before we got on air, I was asking you about what the Monterey Bay Aquarium does, what you guys are doing on plastics, and you mentioned something, and I'm going to want the context later, that you're working with aquariums in Asia about this. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, we work with American aquariums for sure on plastic pollution questions, and we also have friendship agreements with aquariums in Japan that have largely built from long relationships of how to build exhibits, how to rear certain species, how to exhibit them. And what we've found is that they all want to learn more about what we're doing to take on board there. And so certainly issues associated with sustainable seafood. We actually have even a couple of Japanese aquariums do have displays around their seafood watch program, and the Japanese government has asked us, how do you do it? Could we adopt an approach similar to this as we reform our fisheries? And so that's been exciting. The other thing that, though, they're very concerned about plastic, and yet, it's very hard to figure out how they can educate people, so they ask us questions. But it's we don't have a partnership with them specifically, but we have relationships. And our science diplomacy that we use is usually around some of the resource management issues that have come up between Japan and the United States, particularly on tunas. But we've also collaborated with with some policy research enterprises in Japan, because these are very, very concerning questions for them too. So I think we're all in it together.
Yeah. Well, I should have mentioned at the beginning of this, my Turning the Tide project is actually supported by the Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership, in great part because, I mean, the Japanese government, they're actually very active in supporting kind of plastic work and research in Southeast Asia. Not as much directly in China. So the Japanese government is, they're active in this space. And yeah, let's talk more offline about that, because I'm really interested in your aquarium work, even in the US. Thinking about, so I got a question, my first one that came in, Dave Patterson asked, what is being done in the Great Lakes to reduce this problem? So we often talk ocean plastic, but hey, I grew up outside Chicago. Lakes, they're like oceans to us. Is that something, maybe it wasn't in the report, but do you know, in your work, or heard that?
Yeah. So, one of the aquariums we work with, of course, is the Shed Aquarium, and yes, and so a number of those aquariums have been very active, and I think they even have the White Sox have a plastic-free day, straw-free day. So there's a lot of activism around the Great Lakes, and the fact is that the Great Lakes may contain a substantial amount of microplastics. They're very concerned about it. And that does come out in the report. Now, we didn't identify specifically a Great Lakes strategy, but I know that every state is looking at how to address this problem. And I don't have an example of what maybe Chicago's doing, but I do know that this is a very active area of concern. And if Jenna Janbeck had been on, she'd be able to tell you a little bit about a program she has been working on in the Mississippi River, which covers all cities up and down the Mississippi too. So the inland riverine and Great Lakes, and the Laurentian Great Lakes, and also some large lakes, all lakes and rivers have this concern. And so it's not just a coastal issue. And we do see a lot of activity and interest in states and cities that are really affected by it.
Yeah, I'm hoping that as we move forward with our Turning the Tide projects, which does a lot of comparison with the US, that we're going to look, even more at rivers, estuaries, but also, because again, grew up outside Chicago, the Great Lakes. And I want to point out that Nationals baseball stadium, they started right before COVID to start getting rid of lots of more plastic. And so I want to try to reach out to them, like, you need to get rid of more, right? But it's kind of exciting. Yeah, make it part of a sports thing. We've just got a couple minutes left. So if anyone wants to ask questions, you can submit. But maybe, so just to touch on like two kind of final points that, what about, so do you see, we've kind of hinted at, do you see there's a potential for the US to become a leader in terms of addressing the global plastic challenge here? I mean, next week, there's going to be the first talks on whether or not we're going to do a global treaty. What do you want to do?
Yes, that's a key message of our report, in fact, is that we do think that the United States has the potential to lead. And also because, to be honest, the United States has led on a lot of global environmental issues, from CFC control to climate change. And we actually have great national laboratories. We have wonderful groups working in all sorts of different ways. The brand companies are very concerned about this issue, and there's a lot of innovation to be had. And so we do think that based on our policy and our science, as well as the partnership potential we have, we could be. Now, we do have a little work to do, and what I was heartened by was the Secretary Blinken leaned right into it and said, yes, we want to be part of this negotiation, and we definitely want to push towards a full life cycle of plastic approach, which I think is fantastic. And I think that it won't take long. The United States is doing a number of things in the context of our sort of intervention stages, as you'll see on the interactive. And one thing, for example, is the administration issued a recycling goal, a 50% quite aggressive. They're working on a plastic approach too. So there's a lot of pieces going on. NOAA's been working very actively, EPA, NOAA. So I just think it's a matter of pulling people together and being more organized around the response. And I do think that there are a lot of models to look at. So it wouldn't take long once the spark is lit.
Yeah, well, and also that we've had a lot, like we said at the beginning, the cities, states, and the NGO community. I mean, a lot of the like Ocean Conservancy. I mean, they've gotten support from foundations and USAID. They're working with cities. I mean, a lot of the work that I'm seeing from the US side and also the Japanese side and the European, that a lot of it's focused on trying to help get the waste management problem solved. But there's
right.
also
we do have the expertise there. We can always improve. We do ask that the U.S. look to improving, because we now have a problem of a disconnect with our waste management system and the products. Right, you can see why less than 9% is recycled. Yeah. We're landfilling a lot of it, and it's leaking, and it's just not quite working for plastic. So we need an upgrade. But we do have a lot of good expertise. I used to be a waste lawyer, so I know a little bit about it. Yes, I did.
And another reason why you were on this committee. I mean, Pierre LeBlanc had asked a question about the idea of should we only have plastics that are easily recyclable? And that is something that, I see across the board in Asia. Everyone's talking about there's too many different types of plastic. Some are not recyclable or easily recyclable. And, whether or not how that happens, is it, I mean, did the committee, are you guys agnostic to the more like the push or pull, like the incentives or the banning, or you didn't go that far?
Well, we did think that incentives are important, and economic tools are going to be very important, because there is an economic disconnect right now in terms of the price of plastic versus recycled product. It's stymieing a recycling effort. We do think that there's more to be done in that area. The reusable seems to be the number one. And as I mentioned, the Pollution Prevention Act of the United States says you should be looking at the prevention of source, reusability, going down the pike there, because reusable, I think, is really gaining steam, because the recycling challenges, until they're solved, we don't really have that many options. And I do think that part of the problem with recycling is, of course, the chemical mixtures, the different kinds, and some countries have dealt with that by stating, bottles can only be these kinds of plastics, and that does ease, and as they've gotten to a 90% or more recycling rate. So it can be, if the rules of the road are set right, it actually could work. We're not there yet, and we'd have to align them.
Yeah. And just one, maybe, I've got Jackson, a student at Wake Forest, asked a couple of questions about the textiles and plastic from textiles. I know that was mentioned in the report, but I think, was your report, you were asked to mainly focus on single-use plastics, or was?
No, we were asked to focus on all plastics, not just microplastics. And in fact, so we had to take a very broad view. We do note that textile fragments and fibers are definitely ubiquitous too. You're seeing a lot of that in the research on microplastics and smaller. So definitely, we probably suffer from a lack of national scale studies. But in the ones we've had from California and other places, you see the textile issue is very, very concerning. And it's not just fibers from textiles, but it's also from tires, tire particles. And so there are a lot of ways that our wastewater system is contributing to this, and also our runoff from surfaces, from transportation. Yeah. So there's a couple of places that if we could just identify the sources, and there might be some technical interventions that could be helpful, because even wastewater treatment plant screen out a fair amount of microplastics, and that was encouraging. But what do you do with that sludge? Yeah. Be careful with it.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of things, like there could be consumer products, things like certain kind of the coral ball, the types of things to put in your washing machine. Yeah, but it is, Jackson, I appreciate that you tossed out that question, because it just shows you how complex it is. And there's, we're going to be having more conversations looking at the clothes issue. But even I have someone, a PhD student from Duke, a recent grad, is going to write to me about blue jeans, right? Because blue jeans, it's cotton, but there's also those cotton fibers are also because of the chemicals in making the dyes and the fabric that
Talk
can
to
also
a
have an
chemist.
impact.
Yes, talk
Yeah,
to
you
a
talk to a
chemist, and
chemist.
you
Oh my
will
God,
find
yeah.
a lot of reasons why you should worry about it. But however, I think sequencing our approach and learning as we go is how. That's why I think that the approach proposed by the report, which is a systemic approach where you try and tackle each thing. The thing that I think we need the most help with is source identification and hotspot identification. I do think that if that can be where we invest, that's my personal view, that will help us narrow our opportunities for intervention and be very clear about what the benefit will be. And so that's what I hope we will be able to do.
That's awesome. And I think the kind of joke I always make, I'm going to say that, I loved it that you call it interventions, because I was like, America, sit down. You have a plastic problem. And it's complex, but it's but I think that it's encouraging, and I'm definitely going to pull you back and maybe some of your partners to talk more about this, because we couldn't do it all in a half hour, but drank a cup of tea, got some great questions, and I want to thank you so much. You're doing awesome work, and I have to let you know next time I'm going to come out to Monterey, because that
would be great. We love visitors, and the United States is part of the global community, and everyone has to be part of the solution. So I look forward to seeing what happens in the treaty discussion.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you,
and I want to thank everyone in the audience. I want to let you know that on March 2nd at 9 a.m. we're going to have a meeting about women firing up plastic action in Vietnam. All women panel in time for Women's History Month. Who knew? That just kind of happened. I was excited. So tune in for that. We'll be having more meetings, also having some later on about looking at Japan-US cooperation, how we can work together on plastics. So thanks again for tuning in, and drink more green tea. Bye-bye.
Bye.